probably have to draw a whole bunch of stuff first.
Okay.
Stuff that we're drawing in the last time.
Do you want me to not start yet?
Doesn't matter.
Okay, I'll just keep it going.
Yeah. I'm drawing pictures of orbi-simplexes of the subgroups of three bands, the permutations of three element sets. The three element sets, sorry. This is what you get when you mod out this picture by the trivial group. Probably true of all pictures, but for this picture. And if you mod out this picture by the subgroup that switches these two elements, and you get a picture that looks like and if you mod out this picture by the subgroup that rotates the point, three on the subgroup, and did you actually draw this last time, the one that you get?
Yeah, we did the whole group. We did the one for the entire group that modded out everything.
So we didn't actually get to the point of drawing this one.
Yeah, the one that does the cyclic.
Okay. You visualize how this goes, and the way I'm sort of visualizing it, that the whole picture is sort of going to look like just 1/3 of the picture. It's going to look sort of like that 1/3 of the picture. So we have to sort of bring these things around so that they meet. Because this and this are the same, so as we identify this point and this point are the same. So I have to sort of stretch things out, and the picture looks like. What does the picture look like? I think it's like green. Red. And blue. And let's see, so again, these are not just vertexes and edges, they're also two-dimensional pieces here. So, I mean, there's a two-dimensional piece here and a two-dimensional piece here. You know, maybe I could do some sort of cross-hatching or shading or something.
This is three being modded with three cycles that we said?
Yeah. This picture, this simplex, this crease or subdivided simplex, paracentrically subdivided simplex, modulo the axiom of the rotation.
You're taking that one,
If I did it correctly, does anybody agree with that? Because, yeah.
taking that triangle and folding it up into a cone-like thing, and you're looking down. That triangle with the two green vertices and the red apex.
That's the apex?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you said it's like a 120-degree sector,
Yeah.
and we're stretching it out to be a 360-degree sector.
Right.
So these two, this thing there stacks 180 degrees, and that thing there is 180 degrees when you stretch it out.
So you're pasting those extreme edges together.
Because in the picture, you're supposed to. When you mod out by this subgroup, that's what happens.
Oh, I agree. I'm just,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay.
You guys are agreeing.
Okay.
But we're not associating like the ones with the edges from the blue green. We're not associating all of them with a single. We're like when we mod out by the entire group, we associate and we get less of this picture.
Right. There are actually 6 blue greens in this picture up here.
Right, and we've gone down to 2.
Yeah. Which is divided by 3.
But we get cut all the way down to 1,
That's
which
right.
is what we get from the entire group.
That's right. That's right. Then if you go down to the entire group, you just get one of these sectors. Now, at some point, I may want to label the pieces of these things with Young diagrams, like we were doing on Tuesday. But I'll do that when I need to do that. So the first thing we wanted to understand about these pictures is how, well, we constructed them from the transformation group. So we had these are the 4 different transformation groups on a 3-element set. I mean, there are some other subgroups, but they all look like one of these subgroups. So these are the 4 basically different transformation groups on a 3-element set. They're just good examples to see. They're small enough that you can draw them on the whiteboard. And the first thing is that we get these pictures from the transformation group. The second thing to understand is that the picture can be interpreted as telling you all about the axiomatic theory that the transformation group represents. And the transformation group, every transformation group preserves some structure. And it turns out you can prove theorems saying that you can describe this structure in the language of logic, various different languages of logic. But what we're doing here is showing one way that it works. And except that we're showing weird geometric pictures of these logic theories. So we have to learn how to interpret these weird geometric pictures as describing axiomatic theories. And let's do this example over here, rotation group. So, all right, now I'm going to put in the Young diagram, but label the types of pieces of this picture. So we have this is just a point up here. That's this kind of Young diagram. In fact, maybe we should use this labeling up here. This time I think we'll call it A, B, C. And so you can see that the green dots just represent elements of the set, and I put this single box so it represents this Young diagram is just a single box represents an element of the set. But we can't say which element because it's modded out by the symmetry group. And the blue dot represents that kind of Young diagram. The red dot represents that kind of Young diagram. Going from green to blue, going from green to blue would represent this kind of Young diagram. And this is also going from green to blue, so it's also this kind of Young diagram. So far there are two edges, two pieces of the picture that are labeled with the same kind of Young diagram here. And we'll see what that means. But first, let's finish putting in the Young diagrams. In fact, let me remind us how it works, kind of here. That the green corresponds to the separation between those first two boxes. The blue corresponds to the separation between the second two boxes. And the red corresponds to the separation between the third box and the piece that's missing. And so let's see. So going from green to red, so that would be, we're including that separation, so it's 1 on top of 2. Going from blue to red, we have 2 on top of 1. And then the only two pieces that are left without labels, without Young diagram labels, are these ones that include all three colors, the ones that are actually the triangles, so the green, blue, red triangles. Sometimes it's hard to see which is labeling which here, but hopefully you can figure it out. Let's see, I think one tip-off is that the number of rows, this right here, the number of rows is telling you sort of the dimension of the piece in this picture. So the ones with 1 row are dots. The ones with 2 rows are edges. And the ones with 3 rows are these two-dimensional pieces. And so what these pieces are, they're the orbits. Yeah, so yeah, okay. So each piece is the orbi-simplex. Of a transformation group G contained in S bag is represents a G orbit of flags on S. I'll say of the type corresponding to the Young diagram label. So let's try and understand what this means in this particular example over here. So first of all, let's think about the group G. So it's the rotation group. We have this three-element set A, B, C, and we have the rotation group. That's just the rotations. So yeah, three-element subgroup consists of the rotations. And so we're thinking of all the structure that's preserved by that subgroup. So can anybody intuitively try to describe what that structure is? I mean, we're trying to develop a mechanical way of discovering all of the structure that's preserved by this group. But then we're trying an intuitive way to describe it. How do we think? I mean, what is this the symmetry group of? What kind of structure is there on your set?
Oh, sure. Like one, maybe it's a trivial observation. If one color is connected to another color, that relation is not destroyed. Is that an example of something you're looking for? I don't know.
It's probably preserved, but it's also very vacuous, I think, because everything connects to everything else, isn't it?
Oh, right.
But you can modify that a little bit to find something that works. That's less trivial, less vacuous. Any ideas? See, what I'm really...
Yeah, the question, you're talking about each piece, you're talking about not only, you're talking about the, you know, your each dimensional type of thing, right? Your one-dimensional points, your zero-dimensional points, your one-dimensional lines, and two-dimensional.
In this picture, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what you're talking about each piece, right? And you're saying
Each piece of this picture, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that's what I mean. Each thing is labeled by the unbounded.
So I mean, so, you know, again, this may be just a trivial observation, but our symmetry doesn't change what type of object we have. It doesn't change a line into a point.
Right, but again, yes, that's something that happens very automatically whenever you create the orbi-simplex. It always preserves, you know, the green things, the blue things, the red things, when you use this coloring scheme. In fact, right, it preserves.
Right, but you know, I don't really think that's really such a trivial observation. In that it not only it only takes the same. You know, we can call the green points a certain type of zero-dimensional object. The blue things a certain type. It's never gonna associate different types of the same dimensional object.
Yeah, that is very important. I agree that that's very important. But again, it's so universal that I'm really looking for something particular to this example. Because I just need a name, really, for us to be comfortable with to describe this kind of structured set. I'm going to give this example away. This, not that it's a great name, but I would think of the structure that's preserved by this subgroup, I would call it like an orientation on the three-element set. It's sort of like a sense of which way is clockwise and which way is counterclockwise. So I think Prasad was mentioning the idea that the points are connected, but you can actually think of the connections between them as having a direction. You know, either you can think of it going from A to B, and then from B to C, and then from C to A. You know, the sense of which direction is the clockwise direction. And the rotations preserve the sense of which direction is the clockwise direction. Whereas there are other permutations of this set that would destroy your sense of what's clockwise. Right? If you look at the clock in the mirror, it doesn't look clockwise. So, yeah.
Let's agree with that. I don't know. It just seems like you're gonna, like, if you take this, are we only talking about this one example right there? Just the rotation group? Or when we talk about these other two examples? Because they don't, are we talking about?
Right, I was right, very carefully, only talking about this.
So clearly this does not preserve orientation.
Clearly, that's right, okay, that's right.
Okay, so.
This preserves a very different structure. It's interesting to ask what structure this preserves.
Okay, so we're looking for a structure for each one of these groups then.
Yes, that's right, that's right. And we're trying to invent a systematic way of describing the structure. But I'm starting out by just asking questions about unsystematic ways of thinking about it. And I described an unsystematic way of thinking about this example. I think of the structure that's preserved by the rotation group as being an orientation, a sense of what clockwise means. And now let's see how the pieces in this picture represent the orbiters. Okay, so in order to let's try and think of descriptive names for all the different pieces here. Okay, so I guess in order to understand what the correct descriptive names are for the pieces here, it really helps if you know how this is the orbit space of this. So in other words, over here we have the piece that's labeled BC. And over here we have the piece that's labeled CB. And in this picture, we could label this one the BC orbit and this one the CB orbit. And when I mean that this is the BC orbit, I just mean that it's the orbit containing BC. It contains other things as well. It contains BA as well. How it does? It's AD, yes. But these are ways I can describe these two orbits by saying the orbit that contains BC, the orbit that contains CB. And but could you come with another verbal description of what the BC orbit is like in terms of, yeah, right. I would say this is like a clockwise step. And this one was like a counterclockwise step. When I say clockwise step, I mean going from the first one to the second one. Let's see, there's probably not that much else left to describe in this picture. What about this one right here? Can we figure out what that one would be? So, I mean, this is three things lined up. Yeah, and you can tell since it's touching the BC thing, it's this one over here, and it's this one, and it's this one. It's not the other one. So you know what the label is in here?
So you see, that one was the FBCA.
Right.
So any, and the other two would be some kind of cyclic permutation of those three letters. Like the next one down would be
yes.
CAC.
Yes.
And that other one would be ABC.
Right. And yet, what does these three have in common? Verbal description in this.
Clockwise.
Yeah. Clockwise. So once again, you could call these the clockwise ones. And these counterclockwise. And I think that's really the only distinctions there are. I don't think there are any other examples of the same shape Young diagram appearing anywhere in this picture. So in a sense, we've given a complete description of all the different things that happen in this axiomatic theory. So one way you could say it is that in this example, yeah.
That's a quick question. So
Yeah.
the Young diagrams are roughly types, and when you have more than one of them when you have more than one of them, then there are two different kinds of that thing.
Yes.
Or more than 10 kinds of that thing.
Yeah, but I don't know what the official names are. You used to mention the name type and kind, which are good names. They work here, but you know, you just need. I don't know if those are the official right names to use.
I don't think
Right. But yeah.
So we should be able to come up with some term that we say that these bonds, we can break all the same shape Young diagram into a kind of, I don't want to say category, but
I would just call them orbits.
yeah, different orbits, depending on the permutation.
Yeah. See, and I think you even suggested the other day that, the whole, or somebody suggested, maybe I suggested, that the whole idea is to keep track of the orbits of things. But the real trick is that we're not just keeping track of the orbits of single things, we're keeping track of the orbits of configurations of things bunched together or paired together, so that you're not just classifying the properties of individual things, you're classifying the ways that things can relate to each other in pairs or triples or whatever. And in fact, for our purposes, we mostly only really need the completely vertical Young diagrams for now. The other ones just kind of show up in the picture. You sort of can't help, but they're there, and you sort of have to draw them, otherwise the picture gets confusing. But the ones that are really useful to us at the moment are the vertical ones, because those are good for telling us about, well, so these vertical ones with 2, those are good for telling us about the relationships between things that come in pairs. The vertical ones with 3 are good for telling us about the relationships between things that come in triples, etc. So we could give a complete axiomatic description of this theory. We could say that there's a binary predicate. I'll call it CW for clockwise. And the intuitive meaning is that, that CW of XY means that it's, a clockwise step from X to Y. And now we also have counterclockwise, but you can actually see from the picture that you can actually define. Let's see. I wanted to say that counterclockwise is really just the negation of clockwise. We have to be a little bit careful about that, because there are also things like, there are things that don't show up so clearly in the picture, like pairs like X comma X. in logical language, you can often talk about a thing having a relation to itself, a reflexive relation or something like that. But in the picture over here, there's no very clear indication of the relationship between a thing and itself, right? Because the thing is just a single green dot, and there's no there's an edge connecting one green dot to another, a big long edge in this triangle, but there's not really anything like that connecting the dot to itself. So, well, okay. So what you can do is you can look at all the binary relations that show up in the picture, and there are just two obvious ones, which are the clockwise step and the counterclockwise step. So that would be CW, and we have this other one, CCW, for counterclockwise. There's also this degenerate one that doesn't show up in the picture so well, which is equality. That's the relationship between X and X. And the fact that these are the only ones that show up, I mean, it looks like these two are the only ones that show up in the picture, but this one is always there even if you can't see it. And that means that, for example, there's an axiom in our theory that says something like this. It says, for all X, Y, either clockwise from X to Y, or, the symbol for or, counterclockwise from X to Y, or X equals Y. And in fact, it's a bit stronger than I just wrote it here, because I used the symbol for inclusive OR. But in fact, in this case, you get a stronger statement if you use exclusive OR. And that's actually what's showing up in the picture, that it's completely separate cases when you have a clockwise step or a counterclockwise step, or the two things equal to each other.
Well, can I say that
Yeah.
X is clockwise to itself by just going in the clockwise direction 0 steps?
Say that again, louder.
Can I go from X to itself by just going in the clockwise direction 0 steps?
Well,
And counterclockwise as well?
I guess we're always talking about one. The abbreviation that I'm using is just that we're always talking, when we say clockwise or counterclockwise, we're always talking about taking just one.
Exactly one step away.
Not 0 and not 2. But, take 2 steps, it's actually going the other way. So we're only talking, I'm just using an abbreviated language where I'm taking for granted that when we say, it's a single step, single clockwise step. So this is a systematic process that you can apply to the picture to describe, to write down an axiomatic theory, write down predicates, basic predicates that you'll use, and axioms. And the predicates really come directly from looking at the picture. Basically, every piece of the picture, or at least every piece of the picture labeled by a vertical Young diagram, becomes a predicate in the theory, a relation in the theory. These become ternary predicates in the theory, these become binary predicates in the theory, and these become unary predicates in the theory. And so you create names for all the predicates in the theory, all the parts in the picture. And then And then you write down axioms that tell you everything about what's happening in the picture. So I mean, I wrote down a simple example of one of the axioms in the picture. So in other words, this is supposed to be an axiom, particularly if you use exclusive OR here. This is an axiom that's telling you that the classification that's given by the pieces in the picture is an exhaustive classification. It's a disjoint class. So whenever you have any pair x comma y, the relationship between them has to be one of these three relationships. Either they're the same, or else they're one of the two pieces that show up explicitly in the picture. The clockwise step or the counterclockwise. Now, I could go into a lot more technical detail about this, but for our purposes, it's not necessary at the moment. But our purposes have to do with representation theory. And perhaps now is a good time to ask, what in the world does this have to do with representation? So let's try to answer that question now. What do these pictures and the axiomatic theory obtained from the group, what do they have to do with the theory of group representation? That's the question we're going to try and answer. So, okay, so let's get you by this line. Here to here.
That's right.
Okay. Let's remind ourselves how, or let's learn, if we never do it, let's learn how transformation groups are related to group representation. So we have a transformation. And from this, we get a group representation. We get a representation of the group G. And in fact, in a sense, this already is a representation of the group G, in the sense that it's an example of the group G acting on something. But most traditionally, when you talk about representation of groups, it's acting on a vector space. Whereas this is telling us that our group G is acting on the set F. So all we really have to do is turn our set into a vector space in order to get the group back in our vector space. So, how can I write this? I guess I'll write it sort of like this. Well, I better way to write it, but I'll write it as supposed to be a symbol for S by S matrices. That's to write it that way sometimes. Or there's been a symbol for S by S matrices. I don't know. Say it again? Alright, let's try that. And that's sort of in case of their square matrices. And see, this is, you can think of this as linear operators on the vector space whose elements are S. And there's an inclusion map here. This is sort of inclusion of the so-called permutation matrix.
Those are mat sub S with S row by S column matrices with entries from.
Say it again, yes.
With entries, what do we fill up the matrix with? What are the elements of the
You can
matrix?
use any field you want. At this point, let's use the traditional and use the complex number. And so yeah, so these matrices are basically operators, or they represent operators on the vector space and space S. And this is perhaps a low-brow way of thinking of it. There are probably also some high-brow ways of thinking of it, where you think of it as that you have a functor from G to the category of set, and then you have another functor, which is a functor from the category of sets to the category of vector spaces over the complex numbers. And this is the 3 vector space on a set construction. But that's just a fancy way of saying take the vector space whose basis is the set that you're starting out with. So this composite functor that you get here in highbrow language is the same inclusion, it's essentially the same inclusion I'm talking about up here in somewhat lowbrow language. And so, I mean, this represents a group acting on a set. You have this process that turns sets into vector spaces, and you use that to get the group acting on a vector space. And so that's how a transformation group, the group that's acting on a set, gives you a vector space representation of the group. And so we have examples over here. We have examples of G and S that we can apply this process to. So we get group representations from the transformation groups that we're dealing with over there. And the pictures that we've been drawing actually are telling us something interesting about these group representations, and that's what we want to try to understand. So that's what I'm going to try and explain now. How to reinterpret the pictures that we've been drawing as telling us about the group representation that we're creating from the transformation group. So, yes, okay. Okay, so let's erase something here. Oh, there you go. All right, so I'll state a theorem here. And I'll essentially give the proof, although perhaps in some slightly less. Okay. So let's G subgroup of S bang is a binary transformation. Binary just means that both S and G are finite. But R is the complex representation of G obtained by the process that I just described over there. So we're getting this representation R by starting out with this function over here, which is the action of G on S. It takes the unique object of this one object category in the set S. And over here we have a free function. And so it's what I described over there. It's just this process of turning the transformation group into a representation, a complex representation. Then the calm state to the next section of the whiteboard here. It's right in there.
Using R to label the functor or the vector space, or D?
Sort of ambiguously both. This is a group thought of as a category with one object. So it's sort of a very degenerate case of a category. So, I don't know.
And that vector space is determinant by isomorphism.
Yeah, I guess this is a classic example of some abuse of notation, very sort of sloppy notation. R, we thought of as the vector space, the value of this functor, but also the name of this functor. And that's sort of okay, because there's only one object in this category I wrote here. Then the Hom space, I'll explain what this notation means down here, but let me finish writing first. That Hom space is a vector space, a complex vector space. Basis given by the orbit of G acting on S squared. Now, this thing right here, the orbits of G acting on S squared, the thing that gives the basis of the Hom space, that's in fact what we've been drawing pictures of, or at least it is part of the pictures that we've been drawing. If you look at the pieces in our pictures that are labeled by this kind of Young diagram, and think about what they represent these things, the orbits of G acting on the ordered pairs of elements of S. I guess there's a slight exception, which is that the ordered pairs include the degenerate ordered pairs, where X is equal to X. Whereas in our picture, these Young diagrams only include the cases where X is different from Y. So some of the orbits are a little bit hidden in the picture. They're sort of hidden in a lower dimensional part of the picture. But nevertheless, the basic idea is correct. So, first of all, let's try and state what this Hom space means. So, this means that we have a certain category. We're taking the space of morphisms in a certain category from a certain object to itself. So the category that we're dealing with is the category of complex representations of G. And the object that we're dealing with is R. And we're looking at the morphisms from that object to itself. And this is the notation for that. The G subscript sort of means that we're taking, well, a lot of times if you leave the G out, and if R is the name of a vector space, you say Hom from a vector space to another vector space, you mean take the space of linear operators from the vector space, from one vector space to another one, or from the same vector space to itself. And if you put the G subscript in there, it's an indication that you take the G equivariant linear operators, which means the linear operators that commute with the action of G on the representation. And that's what the theorem is going to show. The theorem is going to show that this vector space of equivariant linear operators has a basis given by the orbits of G acting on S squared. And I'll try to prove that right now. So I'm going to prove it in a very reasonable way. I'm going to give some examples. Actually, it's completely obvious from the examples, but the theorem is true. So, I'll use some of the examples that we have here. I'm going to use the example of the two-element subgroup of 3 back, of the group 3 back. So that means we have, let me say we're dealing with this picture over here. And, okay. I'm not going to refer to the picture in my examples or my proof. We'll think about the picture after I give my semblance of a proof. So, yes, okay. So, I'm going to say, S, as we've been dealing with all along, we're going to have S be the 3-element set. Let's call it A, B, C. And let's have G be, as in our example over there, the subgroup. I'll explicitly list the whole subgroup. So we have the identity permutation, and we have the permutation. It's sort of the left-right reversal permutation in our picture over there. It takes B to itself, and switches A and C. So that's our subgroup Q. And okay. So okay, so let's see how well anybody's been following along. So we create the representation R. So R is the vector space on which G acts. And what's the dimension of the vector space R? 3. Okay. And what's the basis for the vector space R?
8.
Okay. So that's already something like this. It's supposed to mean sort of the free span of these basis vectors A, B, C. And now if I draw the matrix of an operator that acts on the vector space R, I can draw it as a 3 by 3 matrix. And the rows and the columns are labeled by A and B and C.
So it should only have those entries 0 and 1 in some way. And
I if I understand what you're saying, that sounds on the right track. So what are you saying?
Well, because if it's going to be G, it's going to be an action, it's going to be an element of G. All it's going to do is permute the basic element. It's not going to, you know, there's not going to have two there because that would not only permute something, but it also kind of stretches something. And, you know, that's.
But how do we know that we want that? I mean, I'm not sure it's obvious that we.
Well, because we want it to be this. Because we
Okay. I'm sorry. I think I was getting mixed up with what you were saying. So there are two different classes of linear operators that we're interested in here.
Yeah.
First of all, there are the ones that I think you're talking about now, which simply represent the action of G.
Right.
Yes, and those are the so-called permutation matrices. And in fact, there's only one non-trivial permutation that we're interested in, so let's draw that matrix.
Yeah.
So what does that matrix look like?
It should be a 0, 0, 1. It should be on the other diagonal. One's on the other diagonal. The top right to bottom left diagonal.
Okay.
Yeah. 1, 1, 1, and then 0, 0.
Here's everywhere else. So that's the matrix that represents the action of our non-trivial group element. Well, what we're interested in is the operators that commute with this matrix.
Why is that?
That's the definition. That's the definition of the morphisms in the category that we're interested in the category of representations. So there's this category of representations of the group. The objects are vector spaces on which your group acts. And the morphisms are linear operators that commute with the group action.
So, and what he says, he labeled this Hom vector space as all the linear operators of R to R, such that they commute with group action. So this is our group action, so it has to commute here.
That's right. That's exactly. So the question comes down to what does it mean for a matrix to commute with this matrix? Can anybody come up with a concrete description of what it means for a matrix to commute with this matrix? Like in fact, we can just try, I think we have enough time to just calculate this out, so brute force way.
So if we take some vector in our vector space, let's label it like x, y, z, where we're just using the coordinates. The first one represents A, second one B, third one C.
That's where you're trying to do this?
That's what I was trying to do. That's what I was going to go with. Is that a little too?
I think it might be a little bit unnecessary. All I was going to do is
The state matrix from C.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I was just going to draw a matrix and label its entries with variables. Hold on. D, E, F, G, H, J, K, and I'm going to try to calculate the condition.
So like that commute with this.
Yeah.
Could you also look at the basis that we know? So basis can be given by these two vertical boxes and whatever labels?
Yes, but so you're working from the other end.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to work the problem from this end. Just we'll see how it does. So we want this to commute with this. So can anybody calculate the matrix product?
Is it anti-symmetric matrices?
Say that again?
So in that order, it just switches the top and the bottom row. And then the other order switches the first and the last column.
Which order?
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, I have that order mixed up.
Yeah, the first one,
Yeah.
so that one takes.
By row, I meant column.
I actually don't know which one you're supposed to use, but we know what, either way, we know what condition we're gonna get. So what do you think? You already switched to
You should.
first and last row or first and last
Third
column?
column.
Column?
Third column.
So we want this matrix to have this property that these two are equal. So what is that saying? Can you put that into more concrete? I mean, I guess just 9 separate equations here.
Yeah. Eight.
Well, yeah,
The middle.
the middle one's very trivial.
Yeah, the middle one can be any entry. Yeah.
And J equals G, G equals J,
So you could write a matrix where you have the same letters in each.
So I guess it's saying that, what did you say? What's that one?
So yes, you just write a matrix where you have, F in two different places,
Oh, okay.
letters in multiple, it's symmetric in some way.
So you're saying
So, yeah. So
that
whatever you label.
whatever,
the
if that's F, then you also need that same F to be like, where is it, a K?
Antipode.
What did I do here? There's something wrong here, right? There were 2 H's, that's the
Oh,
problem.
that's why.
I don't think they do 2 H's. Actually,
That's okay.
that's the only stupid mistake there, maybe. So F, yeah, it looks like you need an F down there as well, right? And any place else that you need that? I guess.
No.
Okay.
Everything has to be equal to its diametric opposite.
Is that really all it comes down to?
L there, E on the bottom, L on the top, and L on the bottom.
Yeah, sorry, I was doing it wrong. I should be writing them down this matrix. Okay. I was doing it wrong.
Okay.
So write down this one. Okay. So we call that one D. And that D.
M is also C.
What?
The M is what you have as
M. That's what you're saying. Okay. And then we call that one E, and it has to go there as well?
And you get F, that's on the other corner, that's it, yeah.
but it's not any different than what you would have.
Okay. So can anybody tell me what's the dimension of the space of linear operators in this form?
4.
4. What?
Oh.
Beginning 5. Yeah. 5-dimensional vector space. Can anybody give me a basis for the space of linear operators in this form?
One is at equal and 0 is at 0.
So for each variable, you can set that one to 1 and all the other variables to 0. So we're getting Okay, so that was sort of a brute force calculation of the basis for this Hom space. But now we want to look at the result of this brute force calculation. And first of all, I pray that it worked out correctly. But what's supposed to work out correctly is that we should see very directly that these basis elements correspond very directly to the orbits of G acting on S squared. So let's see if that's correct. See, the 9 boxes in this checkerboard, that is S squared. And what's the action of G on the 9 boxes of this checkerboard? It isn't even clear why that should make sense. In other words, when G was born, it was acting on S. But now we're saying that it acts on the pairs of elements in S. But it just acts, component-wise. It acts separately on each component of the ordered pair. So again, if we just line up A, B, and C, then you can picture the non-trivial element of our group as just sort of reversing these. And then if you think about how it acts on the ordered pairs, think of how it acts on these 9 boxes, then I guess it's sort of reversing horizontally and reversing vertically. So reversing horizontally is acting on the first component of the ordered pair. Reversing vertically is acting on the second component of the ordered pair. And so, yeah, it's working. I'm pretty sure it's working, right? It's clear that that's what these things are. This box and this box, that's an orbit.
To the degree that
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So for this example is AA and this is CC, and you can check with the others. What is this one over here? And this one is BB. Yeah. They're just completely left alone by the group. So, particularly since we're running out of time, I'm hoping that this example is almost as persuasive as a proof, because it always works just like this. This is how it always works. This is why the theorem is true. That the basis for this Hom space, this vector space, this Hom vector space, the basis for it is given by the orbits of G acting on S squared. And then we want to remind ourselves of how these orbits show up in our picture and how they are interpreted as logical relations or conceptual relationships between things in our theory. So, and when I say in our theory, I mean in the axiomatic theory that comes from the transformation group. So let's see. Let's try to do that. Let's try to give a conceptual interpretation. First of all, is there any hope that we can find the 5 things here? Is there any hope that we can find them in the picture over here?
Yeah.
Which picture are we in?
We're in this picture over here.
Okay. So,
I mean, one of them should be invisible, right?
no,
No, they won't be. Okay, maybe they won't be invisible. I don't know. So we're looking for the ones that are labeled by this kind of Venn diagram. So those are green, blue.
The AACC orbit is just your lower right green dot right there, because that's AA and CC identified, right?
Oh, yes.
That's two of them, that's the,
Yeah, I think two of them are there. Right. So,
No, it's not all there
We have-
because.
And there's the BB dot, the lonely dot on top.
Is relating D to B, that's the single.
That's the
one-
central.
one in the middle.
Yeah.
yeah, is there some easy way I can mark that down?
Well,
Let's
I
see.
mean, there.
Because,
I mean,
Okay, yeah.
we're talking about visible, invisible, by way of the label.
so say again, this is B, B, is that what you said?
Right, because nowhere in the picture did we have, because all these ones that relate, the ones where you have two of the same letter in that
Right,
aren't in the original picture.
Right.
Those are the invisible ones.
right.
Those aren't on, those didn't come from labels of our edges originally.
That's right,
I
that's
think
right.
it is still stronger than those.
Yeah, you
Vertical.
say it's there, but
Still do the.
it's an invisible one-dimensional object in our picture. It's not actually one of our one-dimensional objects.
I think this, I'm sorry, I think I could have written that as vertical instead of horizontal. Sort of contradicted. This one over here,
Is the one we have like kind of
That's
AC.
CAAC.
AC related to CA.
AC or CA. But this one over here. I guess yeah, you can sort of look up there.
It's A,
It looks to me like it's AD, yeah. AD or CC.
Right. What happened, didn't you say earlier that the number of rows in the Young diagram represents the dimension of the object?
Yeah, except for the weird, invisible, degenerate ones. So there's a slide in the argument there that I'm shooting with a brush. That's a good slide.
And that should be the BABC one.
BABC, yeah. So what's this one?
It's the green dot, it's the AAC group on the green dot.
Ah, okay.
That's the other visible one.
Okay, so these five things, yeah, I guess we really are running out of time, so we will have to explain this better, or John will have to explain this better. But let me try and sum it up. This is an important theorem about morphisms between representations of groups. And it's telling us that in some sense, well, it's telling us about special representations. It's telling us about morphisms between permutation representations. That's what this theorem is all about. It's telling us what are the morphisms between permutation representations of groups. And what it's really saying is that these morphisms between permutation representations of groups are, in a sense, logical relationships, conceptual relationships between things in the geometry that we're studying, or the logical theory that we're studying. I just said geometry, I meant geometry in the Kleinian geometry sense. We'll have to talk about what that means. That's related to this idea of an axiomatic theory. So I'll leave it there for now.
Jim, before we stop taping, I just want to say this line, the ornament that you stuck under the rug, I think
Yeah.
one of the most unsanitary mixed metaphors I've ever heard.
I know.